Hi, I'm Jackson Lynch. I'm a results leader for 90 Consulting.
You're listening to ResultsLeader.fm. Being a thought leader is easy. Getting results is hard. This show is for the results leader who lives and dies by their results. Here is your host and Chief Results Leader, Jonathan Rivera.
You are listening to ResultsLeader.fm. Welcome back to another awesome episode. Today's guest is going to share strategies on leveraging human capital to grow your business. Today we have Mr. Jackson Lynch from 90 Consulting. Let's jump in. Jackson, my man, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing terrific. Thank you for having me, and it's a joy to be with you and your listeners.
Yes, sir. Are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's go.
What book or books have you given most as a gift?
It's the Who book by G.H. Smart, and it talks a lot about how important it is as you're building organizations to get the talent of the team right. It talks a lot about how to go about selecting that talent and the impact that it can have broadly in the organization. Kind of the second element of it is a book called Power Score, also by G.H. Smart. It takes the Who book and breaks it out into a broader evaluation technique around priorities, alignment, relationships, and talent. I found that if folks want to communicate with me in a language that helps us with talentology, that is the language we need to pick. So those are the ones I tend to give out more than anything else.
Okay, now I've got a couple things here. I have never heard the word talentology. Is that something you've made up? Where did that word come from?
Boy, I wish I did. There's a professor out of the University of Southern California, and John made that up in a book. Gosh, I want to say it was about 15 years ago, and it was talking about, from a financial perspective, the way we start thinking about the allocation of human capital across the organization. And he was advocating at the time that we should think about human capital the same way we do physical capital and financial capital, such that we place the right talent in the right place to do the right work, and if necessary, make holes in the organization to allow for that. Talks also a lot about how to build up organizations through ascension planning and versus the more traditional succession planning. And he dubbed most of it, talentology. So
fascinating. First time I ever hear that. So tell me a story of how an apparent failure set you up for later success.
Well, it's kind of funny. I graduated from my undergraduate work way back in the day with an accounting degree. And after spending 4 years trying to get into that as a future career, I, like most college students, went and interviewed with every accounting firm that I could get a hold of. At the time, I think it was the Big Six. And I didn't even hit the Mendoza line. I made it through to most last interviews, and then at the end, it was, your credentials are great, but you're just not a good fit. The very last guy was kind enough to share directly with me. You just do not have the personality to be an accountant. At the time, I was hurt. And as time has gone by, I've taken that as a badge of courage. I moved into engineering, then ultimately took engineering and placed it in the human capital context, and away we went.
Love it. Love it. So what would you say is the most worthwhile investment you have ever made?
Yeah, clearly that was graduate school, and I went to the University of Notre Dame up in north central Indiana. Reason was twofold. One, it allowed a trajectory change from where I was in kind of the industrial engineering space into the human capital space. Gave me the language. I actually had a more nuts and bolts degree with an emphasis on finance. It helped me with the language, but most importantly, it helped me with the relationships. Most of our work was case-based, and so you got really good at looking at business problems from multiple different variables. Oftentimes you would have people with different backgrounds looking at the same case. So I was more of an operational focus. We had folks from accounting, finance, both buy and sell side on the street prior to getting there, marketing. And so you ended up over time being able to rapidly look at cases, and you had a model with which you were able to develop your assessment and moving on. I think that individual character or that approach has served me well, both as a career HR guy and then as I moved in my own business and started doing that kind of thing for a living. Plus, the people there are just amazing and long-lasting friendships.
In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
That's a hell of a question. For the last 5 years, I think I have made a conscious effort to assume positive intent. I think early in my career, I believed in kind of meritocracy, and if you worked hard and you did the right things, it kind of didn't matter what was going on around you. I then developed a realization that you have to be savvy in organizations and manage through that. I think, struggled until almost just about 5 years ago with assuming positive intent. Not to be a bummer, but I ended up having a pretty serious health issue that, as those things can do, kind of refocus the way you view the world. And from that point forward, it was a conscious daily effort to realize it's not all about you. And perhaps there are other things and other contexts that you need to consider. And so you just look at everything through a lens of assuming positive intent. Sometimes you're wrong. They really are out to get you. But 98% of the time, it actually allows you to much more gracefully move through the world.
Okay, 2 parts here. And I get it. I believe I get it, but I want to make sure that we define this for our listeners. What do you mean when you say assume positive intent? That's number one. And number two, what are the things that you are consciously doing to put yourself in that mindset?
So assuming positive intent basically requires one to strip away the assumed intentions of how someone's going. Every behavior that someone takes, you have a choice. You can believe it's about them, or you can believe it's about you. And there was a book called The Four Agreements that I read and was given to me several years back. And the second of the agreements is, don't take it personal. And as things happen in work, things sometimes go great and sometimes things don't. And when things don't, you have a fundamental attribution error that you say, it wasn't me, it was somebody else. And that can grow into a belief that, in fact, someone was operating with nefarious intent or not. The reality is, probably had nothing to do with you. So assuming that it had nothing to do with you and trying to understand is kind of what that's all about. In terms of the steps to actually apply that in day-to-day interactions, I think it's really about focused empathy and understanding what could possibly be causing behaviors that you find objectionable. Most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to do good work. Most people want to have effective business relationships. Sometimes in practical application, it doesn't really work out that way. And so trying to very purposefully put yourself in those shoes, what could be motivating them? And then you have a choice. There could be 3 or 4 different motivations, and you can choose which one you believe. And sometimes all of them are informed by past behaviors. But then you have to make a conscious choice to say, okay, perhaps this person is doing what they think is right, and you need to have a focused conversation. One of a couple things can happen. One, you could learn something because you were wrong and they were right. Number 2, they could learn something because they were wrong and you're right. Most often, you reach a kind of a similar frame of reference by which you're looking at the world. And that's where I think organizational magic can start.
What are some bad recommendations you hear in your area of expertise?
I hear a lot about focusing on one's passions and the money will follow. I think over the course of my life, I found that to be a recipe for disaster 95% of the time. And 5 in 100, it works out, but often not because of those kind of personal passions. There have to be skill. There have to be alignment. You have to have a supportive community. There are a lot of things that end up driving things beyond just pure performance. In the human resources space, there is a lot of focus. Well, there's a broad kind of difference in the work that you don't see in other functions, specifically in staff functions, in terms of what it is that you do. And so I think I've heard a lot of advice around focusing on the basics and eliminating all risk. Well, if you're focusing on risk management, then you are likely to make decisions that don't optimize outcomes. You're optimizing downside. So I think focusing on that is not there. And from a I'm hesitant to share this because all of my HR brothers and sisters are going to get mad. But it's about, there's a phrase in the human resources community that talks about finding your seat at the table. Well, I think anyone that talks about the seat at the table probably hasn't earned their way there, because those that are at the table don't have to talk about it. And so how do you go about earning that voice? Well, it's about understanding what the business needs, being able to predict outcomes, assign root causes, and then prescribe actions to address it. And it's the ability to look at a problem, business problem, through a talent lens and help create a different voice that goes in there. When you do that effectively and consistently, you're engaged in things that go oftentimes well beyond the human resources function. And if you're not, then you talk about getting a seat at the table.
It's funny because it reminds me of an old saying I have: don't talk about it, be about it. So you're talking about rolling up your sleeves and getting your spot. I dig it. All right, I know you were getting into that, and we were just about to get into my favorite part where we talk about results. But first, I want to ask you a question. Are you picking up what we're laying down on this show? Are you digging what we are sharing? If you are, why not make yourself a hero today and share this with somebody who can use it? Put this out on your social media channels. #ResultsLeaderFM. I'll be out there looking for you, and I'll make sure to boost it up too when I see you. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's jump back into the interview. So now let's talk about results, Jackson. Why do results matter?
Is that results matter because if you're going to play the game, you might as well keep score. And if you're going to keep score, why the heck wouldn't you try to win? So the question becomes, have you identified the right outcomes that you're going after? And are you measuring them in ways that move the organization, not just parts of it, forward?
Eloquent, my man. So in the last 5 years, what new realization has helped you get better results for your clients?
So I think one of the bigger impacts that applied learnings have had is kind of going back to what we talked about before, making sure you understand their frame of reference. And I found that in business and honestly in life, most disagreements aren't because you haven't identified the problem similarly. It's that you have different solutions, and where those solutions differ, they're often driven by having a frame of reference beginning point that is not shared. And so I think understanding where their frame of reference starts, making sure that you're, again, empathetic from their position and can view the organization that way. It helps you in understanding their decision process and their decision science, which allows you to much better influence and speak the language that is required. I think the second kind of corollary to that is your ability to define success in ways that make it easy for people to say yes to. And that might sound a little bit odd because everyone should have a similar view of what success is. But if you have a different frame of reference, that often leads to a different definition of what success looks like. And again, now you're working on different problems if you haven't driven that, at which point your solutions are unlikely to be as successful as otherwise.
You might have touched on this just a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can give us one or two tips to help get everybody in the same frame of reference, because obviously you have to have a conversation. Obviously you have to have some determined goals, but without getting into an argument or killing each other.
Which is often seen as negative. Yeah. So the first is I think understanding what is the context in which you're operating. And that includes what are the pressures that person is under? What are the experiences that they're bringing to the table? What are both good and bad? what have they traditionally done in similar situations, to the degree to which they have the ability to kind of anticipate and look around corners. Understanding those things, I think, at first are super helpful. Second is really easy. You kind of say, what can you paint a picture of success for me? Most people will, but you can't stop there. You have to ask, several how comes and whys, and what's driving that, or hey, that's interesting, tell me more. And if you do those things, you'll get a pretty good sense of whether their real definition of success matches what the headline is. Because sometimes people talk, I want to go drive revenue. Okay, that's really hard to argue with. What they really want to do is drive revenue through an organizational structure that allows them to call all the shots. Well, okay, now you're into the money statement, where if you didn't dive that far down and you're just assuming you're solving for, hey, let's go drive revenue, you may find yourself in a solution set that doesn't match because you started from a different place.
Yeah, I hear you saying empathy and questions on questions, going deeper below the surface. All great advice. What area of your business would you like better results?
Of course, revenue. That's
well, what do you mean?
Exactly. Over the last 30 years, what I found is you are solving different problems when things are growing, and you have better access to resources when things are growing. And even when things aren't working the way they should, revenue cures a lot of short-term problems and buys you time. I think more broadly, thinking about the broader human resources community, what I would love to see is better consistency in defining what an HR person does. If you look across kind of the finance community and you were to ask a bunch of CEOs what the finance guy does, and ask a bunch of the CFOs what she does, you're going to have broad alignment. And if you look at kind of the functional pillars of that function, you're probably going to get very similar answers of what matters. I think when you get into the HR community, it is much less consistent. And part of that has to do with the kind of organization you grew up in and what the needs were in that moment. It's one of the things that 90 Consulting really focuses in on, is helping small to mid-sized businesses overcome the reality that the human capital approach that got them to where they were may not scale. And how do we kind of think more broadly? But a lot of it has to do with chief executive officers and what they have experienced in previous organizations. And so trying to understand the background and rationale for kind of what defines good HR. You could do it in 1954, and that's great. That's when Drucker said the words human resources for the first time. Many are still there. And then, many are kind of how you look forward and say, again, how do I prescribe actions because you know what the root cause was, because you anticipated what was going to happen. And that's, again, where we can add value to the organization in ways that is rare these days, to be candid.
What results are you most proud of?
I think number one, I've had a lot of folks that worked for me who at different stages in their career who are sitting CHROs now. I've lost count, and that's a good problem to have, and you can't remember exactly all of them. It says that I've been reasonably good at hiring great people and not messing them up, and the fact that they are successful in their roles and we've been able to in some way contribute to their long-term success. It's just something I'm super proud of. I think the second thing I've been proud of in my career is the ability to build HR teams from scratch and to kind of flip the focus of what an HR function does rather quickly. Because I think we have the ability to make an enormous impact on the organization if we are in a position to go do that. When you think about business challenges and when businesses succeed or where businesses don't, it comes down to strategy and execution at its core. Well, those are both talent issues. Who's creating the strategy, and how are you going about executing through people? Certainly, many organizations, it's a little bit harder to find that trail, but at its root, you're going to find that everything comes down to how do you execute through people, and are you focused in on the right direction? And I think the organizations I've been blessed to support have been able to do that well.
Any parting thoughts for the results leaders tuning in out there?
Look, I think especially if you're in a position where you're interacting with the HR folks, I think there are a series of questions that are helpful to have. You bring them in and understand, do we have the right people in the right roles to get done what the business strategy needs? That means that you may need to create roles. It may mean that you need to flip people. But if you have your best talent in a secondary business objective, you really need to step back and think about, is that how we do it? I think the second question to talk through is, to what degree are you good at identifying the right talent, hiring quickly, and in cases where it doesn't work, firing just as quickly? Because especially if you're in the private equity space, which is where I've spent quite a bit of my time, there was a study done, it's got to be 3 or 4 years ago now, that looked across 300 plus portfolio companies across 23, I think, private equity firms. And what it found is that within the portfolio companies, almost 70% of the CEOs were let go after between month 6 and month 48, which has a substantial impact on your multiples, on your hold periods, and on your entire business thesis. On average, that happens about month 27, which means that you have to be delivering results as a CEO sometime around month 12, or else you start losing the board's confidence. If you don't have the right people in place in your first 90 days, chances are you're going to find yourself pushing upstream at that point, unless you have some exogenous impacts to the business that talent doesn't have to overcome. So it's having the conversation about, how do we get the right people in the right role at the right time, and do it as quickly and build that team as quickly as you can. I've never once heard anyone talk about, boy, I'm glad I waited to let that person go. It just doesn't happen. So I think those are probably the couple of things I throw to the results listeners.
It's probably, I waited too long to let that person go.
Exactly. In almost all cases.
Cool. So I know that our listeners are going to want more from you. Where can they go?
Yeah, our website at 90consulting.com. And you can always reach out to me at jackson@90consulting.com. Love to interact.
All right. We were talking with Mr. Jackson Lynch today. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And thank you, results leaders, for tuning in. We will be back in your earbuds next time. That is a wrap for another edition of resultsleader.fm. If you are out there getting results for your clients and you want to be featured on the show, go to resultsleader.fm now and apply to be on the show. And if you love what you're hearing, share the show, give us a rating and review, do anything to help us get the message out there. Thought leadership is easy, but results leadership is hard.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.